Zekthon had seen many species fight. As a military observer for the Galactic Council, he'd watched the methodical Vorthack with their energy shields, the swift Kalari with their plasma rifles, and the massive Goran with their siege weapons. Each species had their strengths, their tactics, their ways of war. But he had never seen anything like what he was about to witness. The assignments seemed routine enough. Travel to the outer rim planet of Kepler 442b, observe the human military forces in their first major engagement against the Draknari invasion fleet, and file a report. The humans were new to galactic warfare, having only joined the Council 3 years ago. Most species viewed them as primitive mammals who had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Their weapons were crude by galactic standards, kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives instead of energy weapons. Their ships were bulky and slow compared to the sleek vessels of established civilizations. Zekthon's own people, the Synthari, had been part of the galactic community for over 2,000 years. They were known for their logical minds and analytical abilities, which made them ideal military observers. His forearms allowed him to operate multiple recording devices simultaneously, while his enhanced optical sensors could track dozens of targets at once. Standing 7 feet tall with metallic blue skin and large black eyes, he cut an imposing figure even among the diverse species of the galaxy. The human commander who greeted him at Forward Operating Base Phoenix was nothing like what Zekthon expected. Colonel Sarachin was barely 5.5 feet tall, with short black hair and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore digital camouflage that looked primitive compared to the adaptive armor of other species, and her sidearm was a simple kinetic pistol. "Welcome to Kepler 442b, Observer Zekthon," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "I hope you're ready for a show." Zekthon studied her with his analytical mind. Humans were known for their emotional responses and irrational behavior, traits that made them poor soldiers in the opinion of most military experts. They lacked the cold logic of the Synthari, the disciplined hierarchy of the Vorthack, or the pack-hunting instincts of the Kalari. Yet something in this human's eyes made him pause. There was a hardness there, a determination that reminded him of tempered steel. "I am here to observe and record, Colonel Chen," Zekthon replied in perfect English, one of the many languages his neural implants had downloaded. "I understand your forces are preparing for their first major engagement against the Draknari." Chen nodded grimly. "That's right. Intel says they'll hit us within the next 48 hours. 3 full battle groups, maybe 4,000 troops. We're looking at 10-to-1 odds." She said this as calmly as if discussing the weather. Zekthon's optical sensors flickered with surprise. 10-to-1 odds against the Draknari, arguably one of the most effective military forces in the galaxy, should have been cause for immediate evacuation. The Draknari were 8-foot-tall reptilian warriors with natural armor plating and incredible strength. Their technology was advanced, their tactics brutal and efficient. They had conquered 17 worlds in the past decade. "Will you be requesting reinforcement from the Council fleet?" Zekthon asked. Chen shook her head. "Negative. Council forces are tied up with the main Draknari push toward the core worlds. We're on our own out here." She gestured toward the bustling base around them. "But that's okay. We've got a few tricks up our sleeves." Zekthon observed the human soldiers as Chen led him on a tour of the base. They moved with purpose, checking weapons, running diagnostics on their equipment, and reviewing tactical plans. What struck him most was their demeanor. There was no panic, no fear despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Instead, there was a grim determination, a sense of purpose that he found puzzling. The weapons depot revealed the primitive nature of human military technology. Kinetic rifles that fired metal projectiles, explosive devices that relied on chemical reactions, and vehicles that used wheels instead of repulsor technology. By galactic standards, the humans were fighting with stone knives and bear skins. "I know what you're thinking," Chen said, noticing his expression. "Our gear doesn't look like much compared to what you're used to. But we've learned to make the most of what we have." She picked up one of the kinetic rifles, handling it with practiced ease. "This M4A1 has been the backbone of human infantry for decades. Simple, reliable, easy to maintain. No fancy energy cells to run out of juice, no complex targeting systems to malfunction. Point and shoot." Zekthon recorded everything, noting the stark contrast between human equipment and that of other species. His preliminary assessment was not favorable. These humans were clearly outmatched in every measurable category. Their only hope would be immediate evacuation before the Draknari arrived. As evening approached on the alien world, Chen invited Zekthon to join her staff for their final briefing. The command center was a prefabricated structure filled with holographic displays and communication equipment. Around a large table sat the human officers who would lead the defense of the base. Major Rodriguez, the base's air support commander, was a stocky man with graying hair and calloused hands. Captain Williams led the mechanized infantry, a tall woman with piercing blue eyes who spoke in clipped, precise sentences. Lieutenant Colonel Park commanded the artillery, a quiet man who rarely spoke but whose presence commanded respect. The Draknari will come in 3 waves, Chen began, pointing to the tactical display. First wave will be their assault troops, designed to test our defenses and probe for weaknesses. Second wave will be their heavy infantry with armor support. Third wave will be their elites, their best warriors, coming to finish what the others started. Zekthon studied the defensive positions marked on the display. The humans had constructed an intricate network of trenches, bunkers, and fortified positions. But, against Draknari technology and numbers, it looked woefully inadequate. What about air support? Major Rodriguez asked. We've got 6 Warthogs and, for Apache helicopters, Chen replied. Not much against their air superiority, but we'll make every shot count. Captain Williams leaned forward. Rules of engagement? There are no rules when facing the Draknari, Chen said simply. They don't take prisoners, and they don't negotiate. This is a fight to the death, people. We hold this line, or Earth gets one step closer to facing invasion. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Zekthon realized that for these humans, this wasn't just another military engagement. This was personal. They were fighting for their homeworld, their species, their very survival. As the briefing concluded, Zekthon found himself walking the perimeter with Chen. The alien world's twin moons cast strange shadows across the defensive positions, where human soldiers made final preparations for the battle to come. Can I ask you something, observer? Chen said as they paused at an observation post. Of course, Colonel. In all your observations of different species, what makes a good soldier? Zekthon considered the question carefully. Superior technology, advanced tactics, numerical superiority, logical decision-making under pressure. The ability to minimize emotional responses that might compromise judgment. Chen nodded thoughtfully. That's what I figured you'd say. That's what most species would say. She pointed toward a group of her soldiers who were sharing a meal from simple ration packs, laughing at some joke despite the approaching battle. But, let me tell you something about humans, observer. We don't fight because it's logical. We don't fight because we have superior technology or numbers. We fight because we have something worth fighting for. Emotional attachment can be a liability in combat, Zekthon observed. Can it? Chen asked. Tomorrow you're going to see something that your analytical mind might have trouble processing. You're going to see what happens when a species that refuses to give up faces overwhelming odds. You're going to see why humans have survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and everything else this universe has thrown at us. A communications officer approached with a tablet. Colonel, long-range sensors are picking up multiple contacts. The Draknari fleet has entered the system. Chen took the tablet, studied the data, then handed it back. ETA? 18 hours, ma'am. First landing craft should hit the atmosphere at dawn. Chen nodded calmly, as if she'd been told the weather forecast. Pass the word. All units to final readiness. Get some rest if you can, people. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As the base settled into the tense quiet that precedes battle, Zekthon found himself in the quarters assigned to him, reviewing his observations. By every metric he understood, the humans were doomed. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting with primitive technology against one of the galaxy's most effective military forces. Yet something nagged at him, something he couldn't quite quantify in his analytical framework. The humans showed no signs of the fear or panic he would expect from a doomed force. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, a determination that seemed to defy logic. He thought about Chen's words, about fighting for something worth fighting for. In his thousands of years of life, Zekthon had observed many species, but he had never encountered one that seemed to draw strength from hopeless situations rather than being crushed by them. Through his quarters window, he could see human soldiers on patrol, their movements confident despite the approaching storm. Some were cleaning weapons, others were writing what appeared to be personal messages on paper, an archaic form of communication he knew humans sometimes used for important matters. One young soldier, barely out of adolescence by human standards, sat alone polishing his rifle. Zekden's enhanced hearing picked up the human's quiet words, "Come on then, you ugly bastards. We're ready for you." The casual defiance in the young human's voice struck Zekden as either admirable courage or dangerous insanity. Perhaps, he thought, there was no difference between the two when survival was at stake. As Kepler 442b's long night wore on, Zekden found sleep elusive. His analytical mind kept running calculations, trying to find some scenario where the humans might survive the coming assault. Every simulation ended the same way: total annihilation within 6 hours of first contact. Yet the humans slept peacefully, or prepared their weapons with calm efficiency, or shared quiet conversations about their homes and families. It was as if they existed in a completely different reality from the one his calculations showed. Dawn was still 3 hours away when the first alarm sounded. Zekden made his way to the command center, where Chen and her staff were studying updated sensor readings. "They're coming in fast and heavy," Major Rodriguez reported. 36 landing craft in the first wave, estimated 400 troops. "Positions?" Chen asked. "All units report ready," Captain Williams confirmed. "Weapons hot, safety's off." Chen nodded and activated the base-wide communication system. Her voice echoed across the compound with calm authority, "This is Colonel Chen. The Draknari are coming, and they're coming hard. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and watch out for your battle buddies. Today we show the galaxy what humans are made of. Today we make them remember our name." Zekden positioned himself in the observation bunker Chen had designated for him, his recording equipment capturing everything. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the eastern horizon beginning to glow with the first light of dawn. And then, like falling stars, the Draknari landing craft appeared in the sky, their hulls gleaming in the morning light as they descended toward the human base with inexorable purpose. The real test was about to begin, and Zekden found himself holding his breath as he prepared to witness what might be humanity's final stand on this distant world. What he couldn't know was that he was about to see something that would challenge everything he thought he understood about warfare, courage, and the indomitable spirit that burned in the heart of every human soldier. The first Draknari landing craft touched down at precisely 0647 hours, their hull smoking from atmospheric entry. Zekden watched through his optical sensors as the massive vessels disgorged their cargo of reptilian warriors. Each Draknari stood 8 feet tall, their natural armor plating gleaming in the morning sun. They moved with predatory grace, plasma rifles held at ready positions as they formed assault formations. "Contact," came the calm voice of Sergeant Martinez over the comm system. 36 craft confirmed. Estimate 400 enemy infantry, standard assault configuration. Zekden expected immediate panic from the human forces, but instead heard only acknowledgements and position reports. Through his observation post's reinforced windows, he could see the human defensive lines. Soldiers crouched in trenches and bunkers, their primitive kinetic weapons aimed at the landing zones. They looked impossibly small compared to their approaching enemies. Colonel Chen's voice cut through the radio chatter with icy calm. "All units, this is Phoenix Actual. Weapons free. I repeat, weapons free. Let them know they're not welcome." The first human weapon to fire was Lieutenant Colonel Park's artillery battery. The sound was nothing like the clean energy discharge of advanced galactic weapons. Instead, it was a primal roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Zekden's feet. Chemical explosives launched heavy metal shells in high arcs toward the landing zones. The shells struck among the Draknari formations with devastating effect. Unlike energy weapons that left clean wounds, the kinetic explosives created chaos. Shrapnel flew in every direction, dirt and debris filled the air, and the perfect Draknari formations dissolved into confusion. "Direct hit on landing zone Alpha," reported the artillery spotter. "Multiple enemy casualties. They're regrouping, but they look shaken." Shaken? Zekden had never heard of Draknari being shaken by anything. They were known throughout the galaxy for their unflinching courage under fire. Yet through his enhanced vision, he could see the reptilian warriors looking around uncertainly at their wounded comrades. The Draknari commander, identifiable by the enhanced armor and command staff, roared something in their harsh language. The warriors reformed and began their advance toward the human positions. They moved in the classic Draknari assault pattern, overlapping fields of fire, mutual support, relentless forward pressure. As they closed to within 800 meters, the human machine guns opened fire. The sound was unlike anything in Zekthan's experience. Not the focused beam of energy weapons, but a continuous hammering that seemed to fill the air with death. Tracers, chemical rounds that burned bright to show trajectory, streaked toward the advancing Draknari like deadly fireworks. The effect was immediate and brutal. Draknari warriors, protected by armor that could deflect energy weapons, found themselves cut down by simple metal projectiles traveling at hypersonic velocities. Their natural armor, evolved to resist claws and energy blasts, was no match for rounds designed to penetrate steel. "Holy shit," came a voice over the comm, quickly followed by, "Sorry about the language, sir." "Language is authorized today, Martinez," Colonel Chen replied dryly. "Keep shooting." The Draknari advance stalled as warriors sought cover behind their landing craft. Zekthan watched their commander gesturing angrily, clearly frustrated by the unexpected effectiveness of primitive human weapons. In all his observations, he had never seen Draknari take cover. They typically overwhelmed enemy positions through sheer aggression and superior firepower. But, then, the Draknari adapted, as all successful military forces must. Their energy weapons began returning fire, sending bolts of superheated plasma toward the human positions. The first casualty report came moments later. "Bravo 2 was hit," reported Captain Williams. "Direct plasma strike on Bunker 7. 3 Kia, 2 wounded." Zekthan waited for the human morale to break. 3 dead soldiers should have been enough to shatter the confidence of any force facing 10-1 odds. Instead, he heard something that made his analytical mind struggle to process what was happening. "Bravo 2 copies. We've got their range now. Martinez, put some hate down range for Johnson and the others." Sergeant Martinez, apparently the human machine gunner, responded with a burst of fire that lasted nearly 30 seconds. Through his sensors, Zekthan watched Draknari warriors dive for cover as metal projectiles shredded the air around them. "That's for Johnson, you scaly bastards," Martinez said over the comm. The human response to casualties wasn't fear or retreat, it was anger. They fought harder, shot more accurately, took greater risks. It was completely irrational by any military standard Zekthan knew, yet it was clearly effective. The Draknari advance had completely stalled. Major Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Phoenix Actual, this is Sky King. We have eyes on secondary landing zones. Requesting permission to engage." "Permission granted, Sky King. Show them what human airpower looks like." The human aircraft that roared over the battlefield looked ancient by galactic standards. The A-10 Warthogs were essentially flying guns, built around massive rotary cannons that fired depleted uranium shells. The Apache helicopters were older still, their design dating back centuries to humanity's early wars. But age, Zekthan realized, did not mean ineffectiveness. The lead Warthog dove toward a cluster of Draknari landing craft with a sound like tearing metal amplified 1,000 times. Its cannon spat a stream of depleted uranium shells that turned one of the massive alien vessels into twisted wreckage. The craft pulled up and banked for another pass, its pilot's voice comm over the radio. "Good effect on target. Secondary landing craft destroyed. Moving to target 3. The Apache helicopters worked in pairs, using terrain to mask their approach before popping up to unleash rockets and cannon fire. Unlike the clean energy weapons of galactic militaries, human ordnance was dirty, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. Explosions threw debris hundreds of meters in every direction, creating chaos in the Draknari ranks. Through his observations, Zekthan began to understand something fundamental about human warfare. Other species fought to achieve objectives, to secure territory, to minimize casualties. Humans, he realized, fought to win. Not just to achieve their goals, but to completely defeat their enemies. There was a savagery to their methods that was both disturbing and oddly admirable. The Draknari, faced with unexpected resistance and mounting casualties, began to regroup for a coordinated assault. Their second wave of landing craft appeared on the horizon, bringing armor support and heavy weapons. Zekthan calculated that even with their initial losses, the aliens still outnumbered the humans 6-1. Colonel Chen seemed to read his thoughts. Over the tactical frequency, she addressed her forces, "Heads up, people. Second wave incoming. Looks like they're bringing the heavy stuff this time." Remember, we've hurt them more than they've hurt us. We keep hitting them hard and fast, we can break their spirit. Break their spirit? Zekdan had never heard of anyone breaking Draknari's spirit. They were known to fight to the death rather than retreat. Yet as he watched the alien forces regrouping, he could see signs of uncertainty in their movements. The confident assault formations of their first attack had been replaced by cautious advances with multiple fallback positions. The second wave landing craft were indeed heavier, designed to carry armored vehicles and support weapons. As they touched down, Zekdan watched massive Draknari war machines roll down their ramps. These vehicles were the size of human main battle tanks but armed with energy cannons that could slice through most materials like paper. Armor contact, reported Captain Williams. Count 12 heavy vehicles, configuration unknown but they look nasty. Copy that, Iron Lady, Chen replied. Park, you see those new toys? Lieutenant Colonel Park's voice was as calm as if he were discussing lunch plans. I see them, Phoenix. Already have firing solutions plotted. Request permission to engage. Light them up. The human artillery response was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of the precise energy weapons favored by most species, the humans used massive chemical explosives that created devastating blast effects. The first salvo landed among the Draknari armor with earth-shaking force. But the alien war machines were built to withstand such attacks. Most survived the initial bombardment, their armor scarred but intact. They began advancing toward the human lines, their energy cannons charging with ominous whines. This was the moment Zekdan expected human resistance to collapse. Facing advancing armor with only kinetic weapons should have been hopeless. Instead, he witnessed something that challenged his understanding of tactical doctrine. Human soldiers emerged from concealed positions carrying weapons Zekdan hadn't seen in their initial inventory. Shoulder-fired missiles streaked toward the advancing armor, their contrails bright against the morning sky. These weren't sophisticated guided weapons, but simple kinetic projectiles with chemical explosive warheads. The first Draknari war machine disappeared in a fireball as a missile struck its ammunition storage. The second lost a track assembly to another impact and ground to a halt, its crew abandoning the disabled vehicle under covering fire from human infantry. Javelin missiles, Chen explained over a private channel to Zekdan. Fire and forget. Not as fancy as your guided energy weapons, but they get the job done. Within 15 minutes, the Draknari armor assault had been reduced to burning wreckage scattered across the battlefield. The aliens had lost not just their vehicles, but their confidence. For the first time in their military history, Draknari forces found themselves unable to advance against a numerically inferior enemy. The human casualties mounted as well. Another bunker fell to plasma fire, and a squad of infantry was caught in the open by Draknari energy weapons. But, instead of weakening human resolve, each loss seemed to strengthen it. Soldiers fought harder to avenge their fallen comrades, took greater risks to protect their surviving friends, and showed a ferocity that even the predatory Draknari found unsettling. Sergeant Martinez, the machine gunner, had his weapon destroyed by a direct plasma hit. Instead of falling back, he grabbed a rifle from a wounded comrade and continued fighting from a shell crater, his voice hoarse over the comm system. This is Martinez. My pig is down, but I'm still in the fight. Someone get me more ammo and these bastards are going to learn why you don't mess with Texas. Zekdan had to access his cultural database to understand the reference. Texas was apparently a region on Earth with a reputation for producing particularly fierce warriors. Looking at Martinez as he calmly engaged Draknari infantry with precise rifle fire, Zekdan began to believe the reputation was well earned. As the morning wore on, the pattern became clear. The Draknari would assault, take casualties, regroup, and assault again. Each time, they grew more cautious, more uncertain. The humans, meanwhile, seemed to grow more determined with each engagement. They adapted quickly to Draknari tactics, learned from their mistakes, and found innovative solutions to overwhelming odds. When Draknari energy weapons proved too accurate for traditional cover, human engineers rigged improvised smoke generators that filled the battlefield with obscuring clouds. When alien communications proved too effective, human electronic warfare specialists jammed their frequencies with primitive but powerful transmitters. Third wave incoming, reported the radar operator. Multiple contacts, high and fast. Looks like they're elite units. Chen's voice carried satisfaction rather than concern. Perfect timing. We've softened them up, now let's see what their best can do against humans who are properly motivated. Through his observation post, Zekdan watched the third wave approach. These craft were smaller, faster, and carried the distinctive markings of Draknari elite forces. These were their best warriors, their most experienced fighters, their last hope of salvaging victory from what should have been an easy conquest. As the elite craft descended toward the battlefield, Zekdan found himself doing something he hadn't expected. Instead of calculating human casualties and defeat scenarios, he was analyzing Draknari weaknesses and wondering if the aliens truly understood what they were facing. For the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, Zekdan began to suspect that his initial assessment might have been wrong. The humans weren't fighting a hopeless last stand. They were fighting a war they intended to win, and they were doing it with a ferocity that was reshaping his understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. The real battle, he realized, was just beginning. The Draknari elite forces descended from the sky like metallic birds of prey, their craft sleeker and more maneuverable than the previous assault vessels. These were the Razor Claws, the most feared unit in the Draknari military hierarchy. Each warrior was a veteran of dozens of campaigns, genetically enhanced and equipped with the finest weapons their civilization could produce. Zekdan had witnessed Razor Claws in action before, during the siege of Vorthak Prime. They had broken a defensive line that 3 other species had failed to penetrate, moving through entrenched positions like death itself. No force in galactic history had ever stopped a full Razor Claw assault. The human response to their arrival was characteristically unpredictable. Well, came Sergeant Martinez's voice over the calm, tinged with dark humor despite his earlier losses. Looks like they finally sent the varsity team. All units, this is Phoenix Actual, Colonel Chen announced. Elite contacts confirmed. These are the big boys, people. Everything we've done so far was just practice. Time to show them why humans don't stay down when you knock them over. Zekdan expected fear, perhaps a final desperate attempt to call for evacuation. Instead, he heard something that made his analytical processor struggle to categorize: anticipation. The humans were looking forward to facing their most dangerous opponents yet. The Razor Claw landing pattern was different from the crude mass deployments of the earlier waves. Each craft landed with precision, deploying its warriors in textbook formation while providing covering fire from mounted weapons. Within moments, they had established 3 separate assault positions, each one covering the other's advance routes. Lieutenant Colonel Park's artillery responded immediately, but the elite Draknari had learned from their predecessors' mistakes. They dispersed instantly as the first shell screamed overhead, their enhanced armor and reflexes allowing them to survive impacts that would have devastated regular troops. Ineffective fire on elite positions, reported the artillery spotter. They're scattering on impact. Negative, Park replied calmly. Fire mission successful. Watch and learn. Zekdan focused his optical sensors on the landing zones, trying to understand Park's meaning. The artillery shells had indeed missed most of the Draknari elites, but they had done something else entirely. The explosions had cratered the ground, destroyed cover, and created a maze of obstacles between the alien forces and their objectives. Classic human thinking, Chen explained over the private channel. Other species try to kill their enemies directly. We changed the battlefield itself. The Razor Claws began their advance, moving with the fluid precision that had made them legendary throughout the galaxy. But the cratered ground forced them to break formation, to move more slowly, to expose themselves to human weapons for longer periods. Captain Williams' mechanized infantry was ready for them. Contact front, came a steady voice over the tactical net. Elite units advancing on Sector 7. Engaging now. The human defensive fire that met the Razor Claws was unlike anything Zekdan had recorded before. Instead of the wild, passionate shooting of the earlier engagements, this was controlled, precise, and utterly ruthless. Every shot was calculated for maximum effect, every burst timed to catch the aliens at their most vulnerable. The humans had been learning throughout the day, studying Draknari movement patterns, timing their reactions, identifying weaknesses in their supposedly perfect armor. Now they put that knowledge to devastating use. A Razor Claw warrior, enhanced with genetic modifications that made him faster and stronger than baseline Draknari, sprinted between shell craters in a pattern designed to confuse human targeting systems. Sergeant Rodriguez, a sniper Zekdan had barely noticed before, put a single kinetic round through the alien's head at 800 meters. Target down, Rodriguez reported with professional calm. Moving to secondary position. The elite Draknari responded as their training dictated, adapting quickly to the human tactics. They began using more sophisticated movement patterns, employing energy shields to deflect kinetic rounds, and coordinating their assault with the precision of a surgical strike. But the humans adapted faster. "Shift fire to support positions," Captain Williams ordered. "Don't let them establish bases of fire." The human machine guns, missile teams, and riflemen adjusted their targeting with fluid efficiency. Instead of trying to match Draknari precision, they created overwhelming fields of fire that made any movement dangerous for the aliens. Zek then watched in fascination as the battle evolved into a deadly chess match. The Razor Claws would identify a weak point in the human defenses, concentrate their forces for an assault, only to find the humans had anticipated their move and prepared a devastating response. When the Draknari tried to use their superior mobility to flank the human positions, they found the routes blocked by pre-positioned mines, simple chemical explosives that created impassable barriers of fire and shrapnel. When they attempted to establish supporting fire positions, human snipers eliminated their gunners with precision that matched their own enhanced abilities. "How are they doing this?" came a Draknari voice over intercepted communications, translated by Zekthan's neural implants. "These primitives fight like they can read our minds." The answer, Zekthan realized, was experience. The humans were learning faster than any species he had ever observed. Each engagement taught them something new about their enemies, each casualty provided information they used to prevent future losses. They didn't just fight, they evolved their tactics in real time. Major Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio from his cockpit high above the battlefield. "Phoenix Actual, this is Sky King. I've got eyes on their command post. Requesting permission to take it out." "Negative, Sky King," Chen replied. "I want their commander alive to see what happens next." "Alive to see what happens next?" Zekthan couldn't comprehend the tactical value of sparing enemy leadership, but he had learned to trust human reasoning even when it defied logic. The Razor Claw assault reached its climax when the aliens managed to breach the outer defensive perimeter. A squad of elite warriors, moving with inhuman speed and coordination, broke through the human lines and began advancing toward the command bunker. For a moment, it seemed their legendary skills might carry the day. Then, they encountered something no Draknari training had prepared them for: humans fighting for their home. Corporal Jackson, a communications technician with minimal combat training, stepped out of a damaged bunker with nothing but a sidearm and a determination that burned in his eyes. The approaching Razor Claws, each one a genetically enhanced killing machine, should have cut him down without effort. Instead, Jackson began speaking. "You want to get to my friends?" he said, raising his kinetic pistol with steady hands. "You're going to have to go through me first." The lead Draknari warrior, confused by the human suicidal bravery, hesitated for a fraction of a second. That hesitation cost him his life as Jackson's first shot took him center mass, the kinetic round punching through enhanced armor like it was paper. The other Razor Claws moved to eliminate this unexpected threat, but Jackson's sacrifice had served its purpose. Human reinforcements arrived from 3 directions simultaneously, having used the distraction to reposition for a devastating crossfire. "That's for Jackson," someone screamed over the calm as human weapons cut down the elite aliens in a hail of kinetic fire. Zek then began to understand what made humans so effective in combat. They didn't just fight as individuals or even as units. They fought as a collective organism, each death strengthening the resolve of the survivors, each sacrifice buying time and space for their comrades to respond. The Razor Claw assault collapsed as their surviving warriors found themselves isolated and outnumbered. These aliens, who had never retreated from any battlefield, began falling back to their landing craft under covering fire from their support weapons. "All units, this is Phoenix Actual," Chen announced. "Enemy forces are withdrawing. Do not pursue beyond the wire. Let them go, but make sure they remember the cost of messing with humans." Zek then watched the Draknari retreat with sensors that could hardly process what they were recording. The most feared military unit in galactic history was being driven from the battlefield by humans using primitive weapons and raw determination. As the immediate battle died down, Zek then made his way to the medical station where human casualties were being treated. What he found there challenged his understanding of military medicine. Instead of the sterile efficiency practiced by other species, human medics worked with a desperate intensity to save every wounded soldier. "Come on, Martinez," a medic was saying to the unconscious machine gunner. "You're too ugly to die on me now. Your wife would never forgive me." The medic continued working even though his patient's wounds would be considered fatal by most galactic medical standards. Around them, other wounded humans helped treat each other's injuries, sharing supplies and offering encouragement even as they bled from their own wounds. "Sir?" A young human soldier approached Zekthan hesitantly. "Are you the alien observer?" "I am Observer Zekthan of the Synthari Collective," he replied formally. The soldier, who couldn't have been more than 20 years old by human standards, nodded seriously. "I wanted you to know, sir, we're not done yet. The colonel says there might be more waves coming, and we'll be ready for them." Zekthan studied the young human's face, noting the exhaustion, the minor wounds, the dirt and sweat that covered him. By all logical assessment, this soldier should be demoralized, perhaps on the verge of psychological collapse. Instead, his eyes held the same fierce determination Zekthan had seen in Colonel Chen. "Are you not afraid?" Zekthan asked. The soldier considered the question seriously. "Sure, I'm scared. But being scared doesn't mean you quit. My dad always said courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid." As evening approached on Kepler 442b, the Draknari forces regrouped for what intelligence suggested would be their final assault. They had lost nearly 60% of their original force, including most of their elite units. By any rational standard, they should have withdrawn to orbit and called for reinforcements. But the Draknari had never been defeated by an inferior force, and their pride would not allow retreat. They prepared for one last overwhelming assault, throwing everything they had left at the human positions. Colonel Chen stood in the command center, studying the tactical displays with calm professionalism. Around her, the staff prepared for the final phase of a battle that had already cost both sides more than anyone had expected. "Final wave incoming," reported the sensor operator. "Everything they have left. Estimate 200 troops, all remaining armor, air support." Chen nodded and activated the base-wide communication system one final time. "All right, people. This is it. Everything they've got left is coming our way. We've hurt them bad, but wounded animals are dangerous. Stay sharp, trust your training, and remember, we're not just fighting for this base. We're fighting to show the galaxy that humanity will not be pushed around." She paused, then added with a slight smile in her voice, "And if we happen to scare the hell out of some lizards in the process, well, that's just a bonus." As Zekthan prepared his recording equipment for what promised to be the final phase of the battle, he realized that his report would challenge everything the galactic community thought they knew about warfare, courage, and the species called humanity. The terror he had expected to feel from observing combat had been replaced by something else entirely, a growing respect for warriors who refused to accept defeat, no matter what the odds against them. The final Draknari assault began at sunset, their remaining forces silhouetted against Kepler 442b's dying light like instruments of apocalypse. What was left of their army represented the concentrated fury of a species that had never tasted defeat. 200 of their finest warriors, supported by every functional war machine they could salvage, prepared to overwhelm the human defenses through sheer, desperate violence. Zekthan positioned himself in the reinforced observation post, his recording equipment capturing what he suspected would be humanity's final moments on this world. The mathematical certainty was inescapable. Even with their losses, the Draknari retained enough firepower to reduce the human base to rubble within an hour. Yet as he observed the human preparations, Zekthan found his analytical certainties wavering once again. Instead of the desperate last-minute preparations he expected from a doomed force, he saw methodical, almost casual readiness. Soldiers checked their weapons with practiced ease, medics redistributed supplies with efficient calm, and officers coordinated defensive positions with the confidence of veterans who had already proven themselves in battle. Colonel Chan moved through the positions like a general preparing for victory rather than annihilation. She stopped to speak with individual soldiers, her words inaudible to Zekthan's sensors but their effect clearly visible in the straightened shoulders and determined expressions of her troops. Phoenix Actual to all units, her voice carried across the tactical network. Enemy forces are massing for final assault. This is where we find out what we're really made of. Remember, they're throwing everything at us because we've already broken their spirit. They're not attacking because they're confident. They're attacking because they're desperate. The logic was sound, Zekthan realized. The Draknari, masters of calculated warfare, would not commit to such a costly final assault unless their alternative was complete failure. The humans had achieved something unprecedented. They had forced the galaxy's most effective military force into a position where total commitment was their only remaining option. The assault began with a coordinated artillery barrage from the remaining Draknari heavy weapons. Energy cannons and plasma mortars rained destruction on the human positions with devastating accuracy. Bunkers collapsed, defensive structures vaporized, and entire sections of the perimeter disappeared under the alien bombardment. Direct hit on Sector 4, came a report over the communications network. Bunker complex destroyed, 12 casualties. Zekdan waited for the human response to collapse under the overwhelming firepower. Instead, he heard Lieutenant Colonel Park's calm voice, "Understood. Shifting fire plan to secondary positions. All units, execute Plan Delta." Plan Delta, Zekdan learned, involved the systematic destruction of the humans' own defensive positions. Rather than allow the Draknari to use them for cover, human demolition charges reduced bunkers, trenches, and strongpoints to impassable rubble. In moments, the carefully prepared battlefield was transformed into a maze of obstacles that would force the aliens to advance through predetermined killing zones. "Scorched earth," Chen explained over the private channel. "If we can't use it, nobody can." The Draknari ground assault followed immediately behind their bombardment. The surviving war machines rolled forward in perfect formation while infantry advanced in coordinated waves. These were their most experienced troops, veterans of countless victories, executing textbook tactics that had conquered worlds. The human response defied every military doctrine Zekdan had ever studied. Instead of concentrated defensive fire from fixed positions, the humans fought as independent cells, each one mobile and adaptive. When Draknari forces advanced on what appeared to be a strong defensive position, they found empty trenches rigged with explosives. When they adapted to avoid obvious traps, human snipers engaged them from unexpected angles. When they concentrated to overwhelm isolated human positions, artillery and air support appeared as if from nowhere to break up their formations. Sergeant Rodriguez, the sniper Zekdan had observed earlier, exemplified this chaotic effectiveness. From a concealed position in the rubble of a destroyed bunker, he systematically eliminated Draknari squad leaders with precision that bordered on supernatural. Each shot was perfectly placed to cause maximum disruption to alien unit cohesion. "Target down," Rodriguez reported after dropping a Draknari officer at nearly a kilometer range. "Moving to secondary hide. They're starting to get smart about my muzzle flash." Smart or not, the Draknari couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter the human tactics. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming firepower applied through disciplined unit action. The humans fought like a pack of predators, each one independent but coordinating instinctively to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Captain Williams' mechanized infantry demonstrated this principle perfectly. When a Draknari war machine broke through the perimeter and began advancing on the command center, her squads didn't attempt to stop it directly. Instead, they attacked its supporting infantry while engineers used shaped charges to destroy the ground beneath it. The massive war machine, designed to crush opposition through brute force, found itself trapped in a crater of human making while kinetic weapons methodically destroyed its weapon systems. "Mobility kill on enemy armor," Williams reported with satisfaction. "Crew is abandoning vehicle." The Draknari crew, emerging from their disabled war machine, faced something that violated every assumption about human military capability. Instead of scattered, poorly coordinated troops, they confronted soldiers who moved like parts of a single organism. Every human seemed to know exactly where every other human was positioned, what they were doing, and how to support them most effectively. Private First Class Thompson, an 18-year-old communications specialist, coordinated fire support with the calm efficiency of a veteran staff officer. Corporal Washington, a supply technician with minimal combat training, led a squad of equally inexperienced soldiers in a flanking maneuver that cut off the Draknari retreat route. How are they doing this? The intercepted Draknari communication carried genuine bewilderment. They fight like a hive mind, but they're individuals. It's impossible. Zekdan began to understand what the alien commander found so disturbing. Human military effectiveness wasn't based on the rigid hierarchy that defined most galactic armies. Instead, it emerged from something far more dangerous: individual initiative multiplied by collective purpose. Each human soldier was capable of independent action, but they all shared the same goal: protect their comrades and defeat their enemies. This combination created a fighting force that was simultaneously unpredictable and utterly focused. Major Rodriguez's air support perfectly exemplified this principle. Flying an ancient A-10 Warthog that should have been no match for modern Draknari anti-aircraft systems, he appeared over the battlefield at the exact moment when his cannon fire would have maximum effect.
His timing wasn't based on complex coordination systems or elaborate battle plans.
He simply understood, with purely human instinct, when and where his fellow humans needed him most. Phoenix Actual, this is Sky King. His voice crackled over the radio as depleted uranium shells turned a Draknari formation into scattered wreckage.
Somebody down there called for room service?
The human laughter that answered him over the communications network would have been considered inappropriate by the standards of any other species' military.
Zekthon was beginning to understand that human standards were unlike anything else in the galaxy.
As the battle reached its climax, the Draknari commander made a decision that revealed the depth of his desperation. Instead of withdrawing his surviving forces, he committed his personal guard, the elite warriors who served as his final reserve, to a direct assault on the human command center. These were not merely enhanced soldiers. They were the finest warriors Draknari culture could produce, equipped with experimental weapons and armor that represented the peak of their technological achievement. Each one was worth a dozen regular troops in combat effectiveness.
Colonel Chen watched them approach on the tactical display with the calm interest of a scientist observing an interesting experiment.
Around her, the command staff continued their duties without apparent concern for the elite death squad advancing toward their position.
Interesting, Chen mused. Their commander is betting everything on decapitation tactics.
Take out our leadership, break our coordination.
Should we request immediate support? Asked her operations officer. Chen shook her head. Negative. Let's see what happens when perfect soldiers meet imperfect humans who refuse to quit.
The Draknari elite squad moved through the battlefield with fluid grace, their advanced armor deflecting human weapons while their experimental energy rifles carved through defensive positions like surgical instruments. They were magnificent in their lethal efficiency, a perfect expression of what military science could achieve. They met their match in Sergeant Martinez. The machine gunner, wounded earlier in the battle and armed with nothing but a rifle and his indomitable spirit, stepped into their path with the casual confidence of a man who had already decided that dying didn't scare him as much as failing his friends.
You boys looking for someone? Martinez asked conversationally, raising his weapon toward aliens who outclassed him in every measurable category.
The lead Draknari warrior, confused by this lone human's apparent suicide, hesitated just long enough for Martinez to demonstrate why humans had survived every challenge their harsh home world had ever thrown at them. His first shot took the alien center mass, the kinetic round punching through advanced armor with the brutal simplicity that characterized all human weapons. His second and third shots dropped two more elites before they could react to this impossible threat. The surviving Draknari opened fire with their energy rifles, but Martinez was no longer where their targeting systems predicted he would be. He moved through the rubble and debris with the instinctive knowledge of infantry who had learned to survive by thinking faster than their enemies could shoot. Martinez, came voices over the calm as human soldiers converged on his position from every direction. Not following orders or responding to commands, but simply moving to support a comrade who needed help. The Draknari elites found themselves facing not one stubborn human, but dozens of them, each one fighting with the desperate fury of soldiers protecting their own. Advanced weapons and enhanced abilities meant nothing against enemies who seemed to draw strength from hopeless situations. When the shooting stopped, the Draknari commander's personal guard had been reduced to scattered wreckage. Martinez sat in a shell crater, checking his rifle with professional calm despite the multiple wounds that would have incapacitated most species. "Command, this is Martinez," he reported over the radio. "Sector 7 is secure. Somebody bring me a beer and a medic, not necessarily in that order." As the sun finally set on Kepler 442b, the surviving Draknari forces found themselves trapped in a nightmare that their military doctrine had never prepared them for. They had lost not just a battle, but their fundamental understanding of what warfare meant. The humans had taken casualties, dozens of their soldiers were dead or wounded. But, instead of weakening their resistance, each loss had somehow made them stronger, more determined, more dangerous. They fought with an intensity that turned individual skill and technological superiority into meaningless advantages. "All Draknari forces, this is Fleet Command," came an intercepted transmission. "You are ordered to withdraw immediately. Repeat, withdraw immediately." The commander's response carried the exhausted defeat of a warrior who had discovered limits he never knew existed. "Understood, Fleet Command. Withdrawal commencing." As the alien forces began their retreat to their remaining landing craft, Colonel Chan activated the base-wide communication system for what Zekthon suspected would be the final time. "All units, this is Phoenix Actual.
Enemy forces are withdrawing. We have successfully defended our position against overwhelming odds. Today, you didn't just fight as soldiers. You fought as humans. And that made all the difference.
Standing in his observation post, surrounded by recording equipment that had captured humanity's first major victory against galactic forces, Zekthon realized that everything he thought he understood about military science, courage, and the nature of warfare itself had been fundamentally changed by what he had witnessed. The terror he had expected to feel while observing human combat had been replaced by something far more profound, the absolute certainty that the galaxy would never be the same now that humanity had proven what they were capable of when pushed to their limits.
The silence that followed the Draknari withdrawal was unlike anything Zekthon had experienced in decades of military observation.
It wasn't the empty quiet of death or defeat, but something far more profound, the stillness that comes after witnessing history change course in the span of a single day. As the alien landing craft lifted off into Kepler 442b's darkening sky, their hulls scarred by human weapons and their holds carrying less than half the warriors they had brought to this world, Zekthon found himself struggling to process what his sensors had recorded. The impossible had occurred. A primitive human force had not merely survived against overwhelming odds, but had achieved complete victory against one of the galaxy's most feared military organizations.
Colonel Chen stood outside the command bunker, watching the retreating Draknari vessels with the calm satisfaction of someone whose faith in her soldiers had been completely vindicated.
Around her, human troops emerged from their defensive positions, their faces showing exhaustion, relief, and something else that Zekthon was beginning to recognize as uniquely human, quiet pride in having done something that others said couldn't be done.
"Observer Zekthon," Chen called as she noticed him approaching. "I trust you got everything you needed for your report?"
Zekthon activated his translation protocols, though he suspected no combination of words in any language could adequately convey what he had witnessed. "Colonel Chen, I must confess that my preconceptions about human military capability were inadequate." Chen smiled, and, for the first time since he'd arrived, Zekthon saw her relax slightly.
"That's diplomatic. Most species think we're barely evolved apes playing with weapons we don't understand.
After today, I suspect that assessment will require significant revision." Around them, the business of post-battle operations continued with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire human defense. Medics treated wounded soldiers with desperate intensity, refusing to accept that any injury was beyond their ability to heal. Engineers began repairing damaged systems and fortifications, already preparing for the possibility of another attack. Supply personnel distributed food, ammunition, and equipment with careful attention to ensuring everyone's needs were met. What struck Zekthon most profoundly was the complete absence of celebration. These humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic military history, yet they treated it as simply another job completed successfully. There was no boasting, no excessive emotion, just quiet satisfaction in having protected what mattered to them. Sergeant Martinez sat on an ammunition crate while a medic treated his wounds, his damaged rifle across his knees as he cleaned and inspected every component with loving care. When he noticed Zekthon observing him, he nodded respectfully.
"Alien observer, right?" Martinez asked. "Hope we didn't disappoint you." "On the contrary, Sergeant. Your performance exceeded every projection my analysis had calculated." Martinez grinned, wincing slightly as the medic worked on a plasma burn across his shoulder. "Well, we aim to please. Though I gotta say, those lizard boys put up one hell of a fight. I respect that, even if I did have to shoot a bunch of them." The casual way Martinez spoke of respecting enemies who had tried to kill him exemplified something Zekthon was beginning to understand about human nature. They fought with absolute commitment when necessary, but without the hatred or bloodlust that characterized most warrior species. They killed when they had to, but took no pleasure in death itself. Captain Williams approached with a tablet containing casualty reports, her expression serious but not defeated. "Final count, Colonel. 18 Kia, 43 wounded, 12 missing in action." Shen accepted the tablet with the gravity appropriate to such losses. Each number represented a human being who had given everything in defense of their comrades and their mission. Yet even as she studied the names of the fallen, her focus remained on the living. "Recommendations for commendations?" she asked. "Pretty much everyone," Williams replied with a slight smile. "Hard to pick standouts when the whole unit performed like they did. Write them all up. Today, every single person here earned recognition for extraordinary service." Zekthon found this attitude fascinating.
Most military organizations focused on identifying individual heroes whose exceptional performance could be celebrated and emulated. The humans seemed more interested in recognizing that extraordinary performance had become their collective standard. As the night deepened, Zekthon found himself in the base's small recreation area, where off-duty soldiers gathered to decompress from the day's events. What he observed there challenged his understanding of military psychology as much as the battle itself had challenged his tactical analysis. Instead of the boastful war stories he expected, the humans spoke quietly about their fallen comrades, sharing memories and offering comfort to those who had lost close friends. They talked about home, about families they hoped to see again, about the simple pleasures that waited for them when their service was complete. A young soldier, barely past adolescence by human standards, sat apart from the others, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare that Zekthon recognized as a common response to first combat. Without being asked, Martinez approached the youngster and sat down beside him.
"First time?" Martinez asked quietly. The young soldier nodded, not trusting his voice. "It gets easier," Martinez said. "Not because you stop caring, but because you learn to carry the weight. Those Draknari you faced today? They were professionals, the best their people had. You stood up to them and won. That means something."
"I was so scared," the young human whispered.
"Good," Martinez replied. "Scared keeps you alive. Brave isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. And, today, kid, you were plenty brave." Watching this interaction, Zekthon began to understand the source of human military effectiveness. It wasn't their weapons, their tactics, or even their individual courage. It was their ability to transform a collection of individuals into something greater than the sum of its parts, a family willing to die for each other. Later that evening, Chen invited Zekthon to join her for what humans call a hot wash, an immediate analysis of the day's events while details were still fresh in everyone's memory. The session was conducted with the same professional thoroughness that had characterized every aspect of the human operation. Lessons learned, Chen began, addressing her staff and senior enlisted personnel. What worked, what didn't, and how do we do better next time? The discussion that followed was brutally honest and completely practical. The humans analyzed their own performance with the same ruthless precision they had applied to studying their enemies. They identified weaknesses in their defensive positions, communications protocols that had broken down under pressure, and equipment limitations that had nearly cost them dearly. "We got lucky," Lieutenant Colonel Park observed. "If they had brought more artillery support, we might have been in real trouble." "Luck favors the prepared," Chen replied. "But, you're right. We need to develop better counter-battery procedures for future engagements." Future engagements. Even after winning what should have been an impossible victory, the humans were already planning for the next battle, the next challenge, the next test of their abilities. "Observer Zekthon," Chen said, turning to him. "You've watched us fight, seen how we operate. From your perspective, what are our biggest vulnerabilities?" The question surprised him. Most species guarded their military secrets jealously, yet here the humans were actively seeking advice from a foreign observer. "Your equipment limitations are obvious," Zekthon replied carefully. "Your kinetic weapons, while effective, require extensive ammunition supplies. Your vehicles lack the speed and protection of more advanced designs. Your communication systems are vulnerable to electronic warfare." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "All accurate. What else?" "Your tactics rely heavily on individual initiative, which could become a weakness if communication breaks down completely. Your emotional attachment to casualties might lead to poor tactical decisions under extreme stress." "Also true," Chen agreed. "But those weaknesses come with corresponding strengths. Our equipment may be primitive, but it's reliable and easy to repair under field conditions. Our tactics may be chaotic, but they're also unpredictable and adaptive. Our emotional attachments might compromise tactical perfection, but they also ensure that every soldier knows their comrades will never abandon them." It was a remarkably mature analysis from someone whose forces had just achieved an impossible victory. Most commanders would have focused on celebrating their success rather than honestly examining their limitations. As the formal debrief concluded, Zekthon found himself alone with Chen, watching the base's perimeter through reinforced windows. The defensive positions were being rebuilt and improved, incorporating lessons learned from the day's fighting. "Can I ask you something, Colonel?" Zekthon said. "Of course." When you knew the odds you faced, why didn't you request evacuation?
Your force was completely outnumbered and outgunned.
By any rational analysis, attempting to defend this position was futile. Chen was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. Because rational analysis doesn't account for everything, observer.
It can predict how weapons will perform, how tactics will succeed or fail, how numbers will play out in combat.
But it can't measure the human spirit.
She gestured toward the soldiers still working to improve their defenses despite their exhaustion.
Those people didn't fight for strategic objectives or tactical advantages.
They fought for each other, for their homes, for the idea that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies no matter how big they are. But that approach should lead to needless casualties, poor tactical decisions based on emotion rather than logic.
Maybe, Chen agreed.
Or maybe it leads to people fighting harder than any rational being should, taking risks that no logical analysis would justify, and refusing to accept defeat even when mathematics says they should. Zek then processed this concept, his analytical mind struggling with the apparent contradiction between effective military performance and irrational behavior patterns. Your species seems to view impossible odds as a challenge rather than a reason for despair.
We've been facing impossible odds since we first walked upright on Earth, Chen replied.
Ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, wars, everything that should have killed us just made us more stubborn. We learned a long time ago that impossible just means nobody's done it yet. 3 days later, as Zekthon prepared to depart Kepler 442b aboard a council transport, he found himself surrounded by recordings, analyses, and observations that would reshape galactic understanding of human military capability.
But the most important insight couldn't be captured by sensors or quantified by analysis.
The humans had shown him something that his analytical mind could recognize but not fully comprehend: the transformative power of fighting for something beyond yourself. Not for conquest or glory or tactical advantage, but for the simple, profound belief that some things are worth defending no matter what the cost.
Colonel Chen saw him off personally, extending her hand in the human farewell gesture. Safe travels, observer.
I hope your report helps the Council understand what humanity brings to the galactic community.
I believe it will, Colonel. Though I suspect some species will find my conclusions difficult to accept.
Change usually is difficult, Chen replied with a smile.
But that doesn't make it any less necessary.
As the transport lifted off from Kepler 442b, Zekthon watched the human base shrink below them. The soldiers were already back to their duties, preparing defenses, training for future battles, and taking care of each other with the same quiet competence they had shown throughout his visit. His report would note their primitive technology, their unconventional tactics, and their emotional approach to military operations. But it would also record something far more significant: humanity's first victory against galactic forces had not been a fluke or an accident. It had been the inevitable result of a species that simply refused to accept defeat, no matter what the universe threw at them. And, throughout the galaxy, military planners, political leaders, and alien observers would read his words and begin to understand that the balance of power among the stars had fundamentally shifted the moment humans decided to fight back. The age of humanity had begun, forged in the chaos of battle by soldiers who proved that sometimes the impossible is just another word for something nobody had been brave enough to try.